Princess Zyria had once been a shining star in the galaxy. Her beauty was unmatched, her intelligence sharp, and her people, the Sultrians, had admired her as a future queen. Her every word had commanded respect, and her graceful presence had made even the most powerful alien lords bow before her. She was born to rule. But now her life was unrecognizable. Gone was the radiant princess who stood in the grand halls of her palace. In her place was a broken woman, hiding in the shadows of a world she didn't belong to. Her silver hair, once sleek and shining, was tangled and dirty, falling in wild strands around her pale face. Her piercing blue eyes, once full of ambition and pride, now showed nothing but fear and regret. Her royal robes had been replaced with rags she had scavenged from the streets of Earth. She had been thrown from the palace she had once ruled and cast into this strange, unknown world. Alone, helpless, and rejected by her own people, Zyria had no choice but to seek refuge here, on a primitive planet that her people had once seen as beneath them. Zyria's heart pounded as she stumbled through the dark alley, her breath coming in short gasps. The Earthlings, these strange, rough creatures, had no idea who she was, what she had once been. She had been taught to see them as lesser beings, nothing more than pests who had no place in the greater galaxy. But now, she was one of them. They had no idea that the ragged, broken woman who hid in their shadows was once a powerful princess, the daughter of a great empire. Zyria had once ruled with power and fear, but all that had crumbled. Her own people had betrayed her. She had been framed for a crime she didn't commit. A plot, set in motion by jealous enemies, had turned her into a fugitive. The council of her people had declared her guilty, and they had cast her away with nothing but a ship and a few credits. Alone in the vastness of space, Zyria had fled to the only place she could think of, Earth. She had heard rumors of these humans. Primitive, yes, but resourceful. There were whispers that humans were capable of great things, that they had advanced far beyond their small, fragile world. But Zyria had never imagined that she would end up here, on their streets, asking for their mercy. She stopped in front of an old, run-down building. A flicker of light shone through the cracked window, casting long shadows on the cold pavement. This place felt like a haven, a place where she could hide. She had no other options. The Earthlings would never know her true identity, but if she didn't act fast, they would continue to see her as nothing more than a beggar. Her hand trembled as she reached into the pocket of her tattered cloak and pulled out a small, ancient device, one that had been given to her by her royal family. The device was capable of sending a distress signal across the stars to anyone who might hear it. The signal could reach any part of the galaxy, but there was no guarantee it would be received. And even if someone did hear it, there was no guarantee they would come. But Zyria had no choice. She had no pride left, no honor. She was a fallen princess, begging for someone, anyone, to take pity on her. Zyria took a deep breath and activated the device. It flickered to life in her hands, casting a weak, blue glow. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she whispered into the small microphone. I need help. I am the princess of the Sultrian Empire. I've been betrayed, and I have nowhere else to go. Please, I offer myself in servitude. Take me. I will serve you however you wish. Please, someone, hear me. She paused for a moment, waiting. But nothing happened. The device was silent. Her fingers clenched around it, her breath hitching in her throat. Maybe no one would hear her. Maybe she would be left alone, abandoned on this primitive planet, forgotten by the galaxy that once adored her. Then, just as she was about to give up, a faint crackling sound came from the device. Her heart skipped a beat. Someone had answered. She pressed the device closer to her ear, listening intently. "Hello," came a voice, deep, unfamiliar, and unmistakably human. Zyria's body tensed. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. I am Princess Zyria of the Sultrian Empire," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "I need your help. I offer myself as a servant. I have fallen. Please take me in." The voice on the other end was quiet for a moment. Ziria could hear a faint chuckle before the voice replied, "You're offering yourself as a servant. An alien princess. This is unexpected." Ziria's stomach twisted with anxiety. Was he mocking her? Did he see her as weak, a broken thing? She lowered her gaze to the ground, feeling her heart sink. I will do anything," she repeated, desperation creeping into her voice. "I will serve you however you command. I have nothing left. Please." Another long pause followed. Ziria held her breath, praying that he would accept. She was no longer a princess. She was nothing now, a fallen star, just like the Celtrian Empire. All she wanted was to survive. And if this human would accept her, if he would take her as his servant, perhaps she could start over. Perhaps she could regain a small piece of what she had lost. Finally, the voice on the other end spoke again. "All right, you've got my attention, but don't think for a second that it will be easy." Ziria's heart raced. He had agreed. Her plea had been heard. The Earthling would take her in. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She wasn't entirely lost yet. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She had no idea what would come next, but she knew one thing. Her fate was now in his hands. As the line went silent, Ziria stood there for a moment, her mind racing. She had done it. She had found someone. But what kind of future awaited her as a servant? And would this Earthling be the one to give her the second chance she desperately needed? Ziria sat in the dimly lit alley, her body pressed against the cold stone wall as she waited. Every part of her screamed for rest, for a moment of peace, but she couldn't allow herself that luxury. Her mind raced as the minutes dragged on. The Earthling had agreed to take her in. But what did that mean? What would he expect from her? What kind of life awaited her now that she had crossed that line, offering herself, a fallen princess, as a servant? She shivered, pulling her ragged cloak tighter around her, trying to block out the chill of the night air. Her thoughts were interrupted by the distant sound of footsteps approaching. Ziria's heart thudded in her chest, the familiar feeling of anxiety creeping up on her. Was it him? The human who had agreed to take her in? Or was it someone else? Someone who would recognize her and throw her back into the streets? She held her breath, listening intently. The footsteps grew louder, and she could feel the tension building in the air. A figure appeared in the distance, casting a long shadow under the pale moonlight. Ziria's pulse quickened. The figure didn't stop, didn't even glance in her direction, but the fear remained. She wanted to call out, to ask him if he had heard her, if he was the one who had agreed to take her in, but she couldn't. She had to be patient. She had to wait. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the footsteps stopped in front of the alley. Ziria's breath hitched, and she pushed herself back into the shadows, hoping to remain unseen. But then a voice spoke, low and steady. "Princess Ziria." It said, the words carrying a strange mixture of disbelief and amusement. Ziria's heart skipped a beat. He had found her, the Earthling, her savior. She stepped forward, her legs weak from the tension, and peered around the corner of the building. There he stood, tall, wearing simple clothes, his face partially hidden by a hood, but his eyes glowed with something unreadable. It was him. She took a cautious step forward, her voice barely above a whisper. You came for me." The man studied her for a moment, as if assessing her very soul before he spoke again. "I didn't expect you to look like this," he said, his voice holding a note of surprise, maybe even curiosity. "You were a princess, right? But now, you look like you've been through hell." Ziria flinched at his words. They were true, every one of them. She wasn't the proud, regal princess she had once been. She had been stripped of her title, her beauty, her dignity. She was nothing now but a shadow of what she had once been. She bowed her head in shame, the weight of her fall too much to bear. "I've lost everything," she murmured, the words more painful than she had imagined. I don't care about who I was anymore. I just need a place where I can belong." Her voice wavered as she fought back tears, but she forced herself to remain composed. She couldn't afford to appear weak. Not now. The Earthling didn't speak for a long time, and Ziria began to fear he would turn away, that he would leave her just as everyone else had. But then, slowly, almost reluctantly, he stepped forward, pulling his hood back to reveal a face that was both kind and hardened by life. There was no judgment in his gaze, only something that seemed like understanding. "All right," he said, his tone surprisingly gentle. "You've made your offer. I'll take you in. But don't think for a second that it'll be easy. You'll work, you'll serve, and you'll earn your place." Ziria's heart soared with a mix of relief and fear. He was offering her a chance to start over, to rebuild herself. It wasn't much, but it was everything she needed. She nodded, bowing her head in gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I will serve you, I promise." The Earthling gave a small, knowing nod. "I don't want promises, Ziria. I want actions. You'll prove your worth to me, just like anyone else. But I'll give you a roof over your head and food. That's all I can offer right now." Ziria didn't care. She was no longer a princess. She was just a woman, a lost soul looking for a new purpose. And if serving this Earthling was the way to find that purpose, then she would do it. She had nothing left to lose. The man turned and began to walk down the street, his steps sure and steady. Ziria hesitated for a moment, then followed, her feet light for the first time in days. She had a long road ahead of her, but for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt hope stirring in her chest. Ziria followed the Earthling as he led her through the narrow, winding streets. The harsh lights of the city flickered above them, casting strange shadows on the buildings and sidewalks. She had never seen a place like this before, dirty, chaotic, and yet alive. It was nothing like the grandeur of Celtria, where everything had been polished and perfect. Here, life seemed unpredictable, untamed. She couldn't help but feel a strange sense of freedom, even amidst the filth. She wasn't a prisoner anymore, but she was still vulnerable, still uncertain of what lay ahead. They passed several people along the way, most of them casting curious glances at her, some with disdain. Ziria kept her head low, avoiding eye contact, acutely aware of her ragged appearance. She had been royalty, a princess who once commanded armies and sat at the head of a powerful empire. Now she was just another homeless woman, begging for a place in a strange, foreign world. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but she had no choice but to accept it. Eventually, they reached a small building tucked away between two larger, more intimidating structures. It was a simple structure made of stone and metal, with no grandiose adornments. Yet to Ziria, it looked like a palace. She had been living in fear for days, unsure of where her next meal would come from or where she would sleep. This small, humble building felt like safety, a place where she could begin to rebuild herself, step by painful step. The Earthling pushed open the door and gestured for her to enter. "Come in," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You're safe here, for now." Ziria hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside. The room was modest, with a few worn-out chairs and a table cluttered with papers and electronic devices. The air smelled faintly of food and dust. It was a far cry from the luxurious chamber she had once occupied, but it was a place she could call her own. Or at least, that's what she hoped it would become. The Earthling closed the door behind them and turned to face her. "You'll sleep in the spare room. I'll fix you something to eat in a bit. I don't expect you to do anything for me right away, but you need to pull your weight here. I'm not running a charity." Ziria nodded, her throat tight. She had already decided that she would do whatever it took to repay this man for his kindness. She had no pride left, no dignity to protect. She would work hard, serve him, and prove that she was not the worthless, broken creature her enemies had made her out to be. He must have sensed her anxiety because his tone softened slightly. I'm not going to treat you like some slave, Ziria. But you've got to understand, there's no free ride here. You'll earn your keep, and I'll expect you to respect my rules. You're not in charge here anymore. Ziria swallowed hard. She had never been in a position where she wasn't in control. But she was no longer the princess of Celtria. She was nothing more than an alien woman, cast aside and forgotten. I understand, she said quietly. I'll do whatever it takes. The Earthling gave a small nod of approval before turning to the small kitchen area. He began to rummage through a cupboard, pulling out a few basic ingredients. Ziria watched him for a moment, feeling a strange sense of gratitude. Despite the roughness of his exterior, there was something genuine about him. He wasn't kind because he had to be. He was kind because he chose to be. She hesitated before speaking again. What is it you want from me? Her voice trembled slightly. Why are you helping me? I'm nothing now. Just a fallen princess with nothing left to offer. The Earthling paused, turning to glance at her over his shoulder. His eyes were soft, but there was something unreadable in them. I'm not helping you because you're a princess, Ziria. I'm helping you because you're a person who's been through hell, and everyone deserves a chance to start over. You're not the first person to fall from grace. You won't be the last. But I'm not in the business of judging people based on their pasts. You've been through enough. I'm just offering you a way out. A chance. Ziria stood there, her chest tightening with a mixture of disbelief and relief. She had expected mockery, cruelty, or indifference from these Earthlings. She had imagined they would see her as a weak alien who deserved to be cast aside. But this man, he saw her as something more. He didn't see the princess or the fallen one. He saw a person who deserved compassion, even if she had no value left in the galaxy. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. She didn't know if she believed it yet, but the words felt right. I won't let you down. The Earthling nodded but didn't speak further. He continued to prepare the food, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Ziria let herself relax. The fear, the anxiety, the doubts, all of it faded for a brief moment. She had a roof over her head. She had food. She had a chance. She wasn't a princess anymore. She wasn't anyone special. But she was alive. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. Ziria sat at the small table, watching as the Earthling moved around the kitchen with practiced ease. He had prepared a simple meal, some kind of stew with chunks of meat and vegetables she couldn't identify, and placed it in front of her. The smell made her stomach growl, though she didn't dare to touch it immediately. She wasn't used to eating such basic food. Her meals on Celtria had been rich, intricate, and served with elegance. But now, in this humble home, there was something oddly comforting about the simplicity of the meal. She would eat it, not because she had to, but because she wanted to, because she had nothing else. The Earthling took a seat across from her, his eyes never leaving her face. Ziria couldn't read his expression, but she could feel his intensity. He was waiting for something, but what? She had no idea. Maybe he was waiting for her to prove herself. Maybe he wanted to see if she truly understood her place here. She hesitated for a moment, then picked up the spoon. The stew was warm and flavorful in a way that made her feel grounded, as if the earth itself was giving her some kind of strange comfort. It didn't taste like anything from Celtria, but it was satisfying in a way that she couldn't quite explain. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, trying to block out the thoughts of her lost world. The Earthling finally broke the silence, his voice calm but pointed. Tell me something about your home. What was it like to be a princess? Ziria paused, the spoon halfway to her mouth. The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her to talk about her past. No one had ever cared. In her former life, people had only wanted to hear about her triumphs, her successes, her lineage. But now, here, sitting with this man who had no idea who she was, the question felt different. There was no expectation, no judgment, only curiosity. She set the spoon down, her hands trembling slightly as she folded them in her lap. It was everything, she said quietly, her eyes looking down at the table. Celtria was my world. I was the heir to the throne, the future ruler of an empire that spanned across star systems. I had power. I had people who respected me, who feared me. Everything I wanted, I could have. She swallowed, trying to push the bitter taste of regret from her throat. But it was also a prison, a gilded cage. I was raised to lead, to command, to be perfect. There was no room for weakness, no room for failure. And when I failed, everything fell apart. Ziria's voice faltered, the memories of her fall from grace flooding her mind. She had once been so proud, so sure of her place in the universe. But one mistake, one miscalculation, and she was cast out. No one cared that she had been manipulated, that she had been betrayed. They only cared that she had failed. The Earthling's gaze softened, though his expression remained neutral. I get it. You were born into a life of expectation. It's easy to lose sight of what really matters when everything is handed to you. Ziria met his eyes, surprised by his understanding. She had expected him to look at her with pity, with disgust, but he didn't. He was just listening. No judgment, no superiority. I thought I could handle it, Ziria continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought I could rule, that I could keep everyone in line. But I didn't realize how much it would cost. I didn't realize how alone I'd be. When everything went wrong, there was no one left to help me. I had no allies, no friends. I was nothing. The Earthling leaned back in his chair, his eyes thoughtful. I'm not here to judge you, Ziria. I'm not here to fix your past. What happened to you, what you lost. It's not something you can just change. But you're here now, and you've got a chance to make something of it. You don't have to be that princess anymore. You can be whoever you want to be. Ziria looked down at the table again, her hands clenching the edge of the wood. She had no idea who she was anymore. The title of princess meant nothing now. She wasn't royalty. She wasn't even a noble. She was just a girl with no future, no identity, and no place in the world. But somehow she felt a glimmer of something in the Earthling's words, a possibility, a chance to be more than just the broken remains of a fallen dynasty. Who am I now? She asked, the question escaping her lips before she could stop it. What do I even have left to offer? The Earthling didn't answer right away. He stood up and moved over to a small bookshelf in the corner of the room, scanning the titles for a moment. Then he pulled one from the shelf and handed it to her. It was a simple book, nothing fancy, just a collection of short stories. He smiled slightly as he placed it in her hands. Read this, he said. It's not much, but it's a start. You've got a lot to figure out, Ziria, and I can't do it for you. But if you want to find out who you are now, you'll have to do it on your own. The only thing I can offer is a place to start. Ziria took the book, her fingers brushing the cover. For the first time in a long while, she felt something shift inside her. It wasn't the grand, sudden awakening of someone who had found their purpose. It was small, almost imperceptible. But it was there. She wasn't a princess anymore, and she wasn't a broken soul. She was something else, something new. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. The Earthling didn't say anything more. He simply nodded and left her alone with the book. Ziria sat there for a while, staring at the pages, feeling the weight of her past pressing down on her. But as the minutes passed, she felt something else. Hope. It was quiet, almost shy, but it was there. Maybe, just maybe, she could rebuild her life. Maybe she could find who she truly was, beyond the titles and the expectations. Ziria spent the next few days in silence, absorbing the stillness of her new life. The Earthling, who had introduced himself as Jackson, went about his daily routine, giving her space, but also offering occasional words of encouragement. He never treated her with pity or condescension. He simply allowed her to exist. That was something she hadn't known for a long time. In Celtria, she had always been watched, scrutinized, expected to perform. Here, in this modest home on a foreign planet, she was allowed to breathe. Jackson had given her the book, and though she wasn't much of a reader, she found herself opening its pages every evening. It was a collection of short stories, stories about ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. Some were about people facing battles, others about quiet struggles. Ziria found herself drawn to the words. They weren't about royalty or empires. They were about survival, resilience, and finding hope when everything seemed lost. She wasn't sure what she was looking for in these stories, but she felt like she might find something of herself in them. One evening, as the sun began to set and the stars slowly emerged in the sky, Jackson returned from a long day outside. He had been working on some kind of mechanical device in his garage, a hobby he rarely spoke about. Ziria was sitting at the small table, her eyes fixed on the pages of the book. She hadn't realized how much time had passed. It had been hours, but she felt as though she was just beginning to understand the words on the page. When Jackson entered, he nodded at her, offering a faint smile. "How's the book?" he asked. Ziria looked up from the pages, startled by his question. She hadn't expected him to show much interest in her reading. "It's interesting," she said, unsure of how to explain it. "I never really read much growing up. But these stories, they're different. They make me think." Jackson pulled up a chair and sat across from her. "Good. Reading is a good way to open your mind. It can help you find answers, or at least help you understand your own thoughts better." Ziria closed the book gently, placing it on the table. She didn't feel the need to continue reading right now. Instead, she looked at Jackson, studying him for a moment. She had started to notice small things about him: his quiet patience, his willingness to help without asking for anything in return, his belief that she could change, even though she wasn't sure she could. "Why are you doing this for me?" she asked, her voice quiet. She had asked him this before, but now it felt different. Her question was no longer driven by desperation. It was more of a curiosity, a longing to understand what motivated him. What did he see in her that made him want to offer her a chance at redemption? Jackson didn't answer immediately. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. "I guess I don't really know," he said at last. "I've always believed that everyone deserves a chance, even if they've fallen from grace. You've been through a lot, Ziria. I can't imagine what it's like to lose everything like that, to feel like you have nothing left. But I do know one thing. You're not the first person to fall. Everyone makes mistakes, and sometimes the only way to make up for those mistakes is to keep going. It's not about being perfect. It's about trying again." Ziria was silent for a long time, her mind spinning with his words. She had never thought about it that way before. In Celtria, failure had been unforgivable. If you made one mistake, it could cost you everything. She had seen it happen to countless others. Enemies, traitors, even her own family. Once you fell from grace, you were gone. But here, Jackson was telling her that failure didn't have to be the end, that there was always room to try again, no matter how far you'd fallen. She didn't know if she believed him yet. It was hard to imagine that she could truly change, that she could find a place for herself again. But for the first time in a long time, she felt the spark of something deep within her. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to be more than just a fallen princess. Maybe she could find a way to be someone again. The next few days passed in a blur of small tasks. Jackson showed her how to clean, how to cook simple meals, and even how to help him with small mechanical repairs around the house. Ziria wasn't used to this kind of work. She had been trained to lead, to command, but not to fix things with her hands. It was humbling and at times frustrating, but she found herself growing more accustomed to it. There was something freeing about the simplicity of it all. For the first time, she didn't have to worry about politics, war, or the expectations of her people. She only had to focus on the present. One afternoon, while they were working together on fixing a small broken window in the back of the house, Ziria looked at Jackson again. He had been patient with her, teaching her step by step, never rushing her or making her feel inadequate. There was something in his kindness that she hadn't known before, something that made her want to be better, not just for herself, but for him as well. "Jackson," she said, her voice steady now, "thank you for everything. For giving me a chance when I didn't deserve one." Jackson paused and turned to face her. His eyes softened, and he gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You don't have to thank me, Ziria. You're doing the hard work. I'm just here to help you along the way. You're the one who's making the change." For the first time in a long while, Ziria felt a flicker of hope deep inside her. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but for the first time, she was willing to find out. She was learning how to be someone again, how to stand on her own 2 feet, how to live without the weight of her past constantly bearing down on her. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be days when she doubted herself, but as long as she had this chance, she would keep moving forward. Maybe, just maybe, she could find her place in this strange new world, and perhaps in time, she could learn to be more than just a fallen princess. She could learn to be Ziria again. The days stretched into weeks, and Ziria slowly adapted to her new life. She no longer felt like a prisoner, but a woman starting over, with a chance to reclaim her sense of self. Each morning, she would wake to the sounds of birds outside the small house. No grand fanfare, no royal horns announcing the start of her day. Just the quiet, simple peace of a world far removed from the palace halls of Sultria. Ziria spent her time learning, absorbing new skills, and finding purpose in the tasks she once would have deemed beneath her. She'd never thought she'd know how to fix a broken chair or patch up a leak in a roof. But here, with Jackson, it felt right. Each little accomplishment, no matter how small, became a step toward reclaiming what she had lost. The humiliation of her fall from grace was still a heavy weight on her heart, but with each passing day, she felt less consumed by it. It wasn't just the manual labor that was changing her. It was the way she had begun to view the world. Before, she had lived in the bubble of her title, always surrounded by courtiers, advisors, and subjects. Every decision had been made for her or around her, and there was always someone telling her what to do or how to act. She had never questioned the role she was expected to play. She was a princess. That was enough. But now, as she worked side by side with Jackson, something inside her began to shift. She wasn't a princess here. She wasn't a figurehead or an icon. She was just a woman, trying to survive, learning new things, and finding strength in places she never thought to look. There was still a deep scar from her fall, of course. The memories of her past haunted her, but they didn't control her anymore. She had learned that the pain of loss didn't need to define who she was in the present. She wasn't defined by the mistakes of others or the cruelty of fate. She was her own person now. One evening, after a long day of repairs and organizing, Ziria found herself sitting at the table, as she often did, staring at the pages of the book Jackson had given her. The stories had become more than just words on a page. They had become something she could relate to. The protagonists were flawed. Sometimes they were defeated, sometimes they were broken. But they kept going. They found strength in their failures, learned from their mistakes, and ultimately overcame the odds. Ziria could see herself in their journeys, even if her story was vastly different. She wasn't a princess anymore. She was something else, something unrecognizable, but still full of potential. That night, as she read, Jackson returned from the village. He was carrying a small bundle of supplies, which he placed on the kitchen counter. As he noticed Ziria still absorbed in the book, he smiled softly. "You're really getting into that, huh?" he said, his tone light and teasing. Ziria looked up from the book, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. "It's interesting," she said, not wanting to admit how much it had begun to mean to her. "It makes me think that maybe I can change too." Jackson raised an eyebrow, walking over to where she sat. He leaned against the counter, watching her thoughtfully. "I never doubted it," he said, his voice sincere. You just have to keep pushing forward. Change isn't something that happens all at once. It's small moments, one after another. And sometimes, you won't even realize it's happening until one day, you wake up and you're someone new. Ziria closed the book, her eyes meeting his. She wasn't sure what had shifted inside her, whether it was the words she had read, or the quiet support Jackson had shown her. But she knew something had changed. A deep feeling of gratitude began to fill her chest. She wasn't the same person who had arrived here, broken and scared. She wasn't even the same person she had been a few weeks ago. She had learned to cook, to clean, and to fix things. She had learned to be patient, to be kind to herself, and to be honest with Jackson about her fears and her dreams. She had learned that who she was didn't have to be defined by her past mistakes or her royal bloodline. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice filled with emotion. "I'm not sure I would have believed any of this if I hadn't come here. You've given me more than just a place to stay, Jackson. You've given me a chance to rebuild, to find out who I really am." Jackson smiled, a soft warmth in his eyes. "You've done the hard work, Ziria. I'm just here to give you the space to do it. You're the one finding your own path." She looked at him, her heart full of gratitude and something more, a growing sense of belonging, of trust. She wasn't alone in this journey, and she wasn't without purpose. The following days brought more change. Ziria became more independent, confident in the skills she had acquired and the strength she had rediscovered. She took on more responsibilities around the house, learning how to manage small projects on her own. Each task, no matter how small, was a reminder that she was capable, that she was no longer a broken princess, but someone who could stand tall, regardless of her past. One evening, as they worked together on a new project outside, Ziria felt the familiar sense of fear creep into her thoughts. She had been given a second chance, yes, but what would happen when the past came calling? Would she be able to handle it? Could she really escape who she had been? Jackson seemed to sense her worry, for he paused and looked at her, his face gentle. "You can't outrun your past, Ziria," he said quietly, "but you can decide how it shaped you from here on out." Ziria nodded slowly, taking his words to heart. She knew there would be challenges ahead. There would always be moments when she doubted herself, when the weight of her past would threaten to crush her. But now, for the first time, she had hope. She had found a way forward. And as long as she kept moving forward, maybe, just maybe, she could find a new identity, a new purpose, and a new life.